And Eckert, would you like to add anything?
Yes, in fact, I really do not want to add anything, but I just wanted to make a few comments in my capacity as president of this organization. Once in a while, I take a look at our bylaws, and they are interesting. They probably have to be overdone because some of the things that we did 35 years ago have been replaced. Like our digital era is different from what it was 35 years ago. But I just wanted to mention a word about our Wednesday meetings. I think we identify them today with our wonderful presentations, with our programs for 42 times a year, just with a few weeks summer pause. But really, these Wednesday meetings are just not only meant to have presentations, they are our regular meetings for our organization. So I looked at that and I feel we should, while the emphasis clearly is on presentations, we also need to talk about our organization once in a while and how we function and what we're doing. Sheeta just mentioned the class program, and I would like to add to that one. Yes, indeed, it was excellent this year, and it was very successful. And we also passed our financial budget, so we have enough dollars in our coffers to continue with our challenging program, not only for the classes, but also for our weekly programs. That's one comment I wanted to make. But I also wanted to make another comment. Last week, we lost a wonderful member. Ruth Anderson was 104 years old, and she passed away. She was one of our first members who joined this organization shortly after its inception, and she has been a wonderful lady. We, I think, talked about her in our on the message board, and many of you, particularly those from our Naples area, knew her personally. She was not only a long member, she was very active, and she was a brilliant lady, and she was one of the first computer technologists of her time. And I'm just feel that I need to talk to all of you and mention that we lost her. And at that time, I just wanted to find out how many more members do we really have that have been associated with our organization for such a long time. And I looked at our database, and I just found one member who is still a member and has joined us before Ruth, and that is Duke Vasey. I believe he's still around in Naples. He's not very active in our organization. And then I found out we have about probably 4 or 5 more members who all joined the same day that Ruth joined, namely January 1st, 1986. They are still around. And although we have become a worldwide organization within the last few years, it is nevertheless, I think, good once in a while to look back to where we are coming from, to the roots. And I think we were a small organization blessed with dedicated people who created and made sure that we had the capacity and the capability to become what we are today. So I just wanted to make these comments regarding our organization. I think you might be interested in how old we are as an organization, and we have changed. But now I do respect really the main purpose of our Wednesday meetings these days. Those are the wonderful presentations that our organization is capable of offering to our membership. So Dan, I pass the baton back to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Eckert. All right. Today, we are privileged to have Mike Kwasniak. Now, he's been with us for a while, but I think today is going to be very fascinating. So I'm going to do a formal introduction here. Let me pull up there we go. All right. I'm excited to introduce to you a truly remarkable photographer, Mike Kwasniak. Mike hails from Suffolk, I hope I'm saying that right, England, and is a master of capturing the energy and emotion of live performance on stage. His work has earned him the esteemed honor of being awarded the fellowship of the prestigious Royal Photographic Society. Mike's passion began as a hobby, but he has since turned it into a lifelong career, which I think is awesome. And, He has captured stunning images from some of the most iconic performers in the entertainment industry. His expertise in the field of stage photography is unparalleled, and you can see it in his photographs. I've seen his photographs through many of his presentations, and they are truly remarkable. And his images are a true testament to his talent. So today we have the opportunity to learn from Mike and gain insight into how he has managed to carve out such a successful career in the photography industry. He will also have the chance to view, or we will also have the chance to view, some of his incredible work and leave us in awe. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mike Kwasniak in our meeting today. Mike, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Dan. I don't recognize who you've just described, but thanks very much. Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome from Suffolk. I'm a bit nervous. I feel really privileged that NMUG have very kindly asked me to talk about my job and explain how bizarrely I became a fellow of the Royal Photographic Society through COVID. And so I'm going to spend the next hour and a quarter talking about the job of being a theatre photographer. I'm going to share a lot of images with you, which I hope that you will enjoy. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the journey that started with a short presentation like this one and ended up with the fellowship of the Royal Photographic Society. So let me just tell you a little bit about me. In the late 1970s and the early 80s, I was a member of a number of amateur groups, amateur theatre groups around my hometown of Ipswich in Suffolk. I'm not sure whether they're as prevalent in the US as they are here in the UK, but we have amateur groups working in every town, in every city, in every village in the country. Some of them work on tiny, teeny budgets, and they're really not very good. And some of them are absolutely extraordinary and produce work which is very difficult to detect that they are actually amateur and not professional. And I'll be sharing some of those, I hope, with you a little later in this talk. Anyway, through the late 70s, I was a member of 3 different groups. So I was learning 3 scripts at a time sometimes and appearing in a lot of work. One of the groups that I was a member of was often visited by the management of our local professional theatre because the output was really very good. And again, I endlessly talk about privilege, but it was a privilege at the time to be part of that particular company. I was an avid amateur filmmaker and they embraced that. So through the late 70s, we were possibly the only amateur company in the country that was experimenting with multimedia and pulling film into stage productions. And anyway, our regular director was also the head of publicity at our local professional theatre, the Wolsey, and here it is. So this is a beautiful, beautiful building. It opened in 1979. It was designed by a guy called Rod Ham, and it won all sorts of awards for its design because of its very clever sightlines. There simply isn't a poor seat in the house. Wherever you sit, in the very cheapest seats or the most expensive seats, your view of the stage is completely unhindered. So it's a lovely space. In 1983, I had a panic call from the marketing department at the theatre. It was my friend who had been directing me many times and watching me photograph amateur shows relentlessly through previous years. And he phoned and said, look, we're doing this big, big professional production of Jesus Christ Superstar. And I'm sure you all know Jesus Christ Superstar. It's wall-to-wall sung. So it's a very, very demanding piece for actors, whether they are professional or not. And for this production, they decided that they would have a set of subs who would learn the entire roles of the principal parts. And as understudies, they would go on and perform all of the matinee performances while the regular cast did all of the evening performances, thus giving the regular cast a chance to recover from 3 hours of singing. And the problem for the theatre was that they'd had their regular cast photographed by their regular theatre photographer, but they had no pictures of the understudies. So I was asked if I would go in as a favor because they had no budget at all. And apart from a couple of rolls of film, and just asked me if I would go in and just spend half an hour taking pictures of the understudies going through the motions of this wonderful production. And so I did, and it was very successful. And so Jesus Christ Superstar not only turned into the first professional show that I was ever responsible for photographing, but it really could be argued that Jesus kind of carved a career for me from this, because following this, just a few months later, a position became available in the marketing department at the theatre. So I joined the Wolsey Theatre in Ipswich as a member of the permanent staff. And the moment that I joined, they asked me if I would like to have a crack at photographing their next production, which of course I absolutely leapt at. And before I show you some pictures, I want to talk a bit about how horrendous that first experience was, because the first play that I was asked to photograph was a play called Crucifer of Blood. You may not have heard of it. I'm sure it ran on Broadway a million years ago, as it did here in London. And it's a Sherlock Holmes thriller, but it's an enormously complex play because it has 5 absolutely massive scene changes. It begins in a big old Indian temple. It moves to an opium den. It moves to 221 Baker Street, the home of Sherlock Holmes. In the 4th act, for its kind of big finale-ish kind of crazy madness, it moves to the middle of the River Thames, literally, and the Wolsey flooded their stage with dry ice so that you couldn't see the stage floor. They had revolves built into the floor so that they could place boats on the revolves, and the boats could be seen slowly gliding across the stage. It was quite phenomenal. However, the entire play was set at night. And it was impossible to absolutely impossible to photograph. So the deal with the dress rehearsal is this. You roll up, hopefully at 7:45, which is the time that most dress rehearsals begin. They run a performance just as if the audience is in. So there are no delays, there are no hold-ups, nobody stops if something breaks, nobody stops if somebody forgets a line, nobody stops for anything, and that includes the photographer. So I was well armed for this because I'd photographed many amateur productions using that kind of style of work, and being used to kind of getting a bit sweaty and a bit terrified. But this play was so dark, I couldn't even see to focus the lens most of the time. And I remember sitting in the dark with my camera sitting on my lap, just thinking, they're going to sack me because I simply can't take pictures of this. And 2.5 hours later, I was in quite a panic because the entire play is set in very, very little light. Anyway, it all turned out all right because I think everybody else realized that it was impossible to photograph. So subsequently, they organized a photo call and we were able to record some pictures with a bit more light on the stage. So that brings me to the first of my collections of slides. First of all, this is a collection of images recorded between 1984 and 1996 or thereabouts. It was a lovely, lovely time to work in professional theatre during that period. And despite our theatre being quite small, sat 400 people, the Wolsey received a fairly substantial budget from the Arts Council of Great Britain at the time, so it was able to afford large companies, beautiful costumes, and as I said, it was a lovely time to be around. As far as my job was concerned, I was usually afforded a budget that stretched to about 5 rolls of film. So that's a total of 180 shots, black and white film, of course, but 180 shots that needed to be spread across the 2.5 hours typically running time of each play, which was quite a challenge. The equipment was completely manual. Manual focusing, manual exposure, manual everything. So it was very important to know one's camera absolutely inside out in order to be able to control all of those elements successfully during the course of a dress rehearsal. As I said earlier, nothing stops. Nobody stops for anyone. So even if I'd been perhaps changing a roll of film in the back of the camera when something absolutely crucial happened on stage, it was tough. It was past. It was gone. So there was no going back for absolutely anything apart from this company. So this rather odd image is from a production of Mill on the Floss, by a company called Shared Experience. And we had a lovely relationship with Shared Experience, which was a London-based company that toured the entire planet. And Shared Experience for a few years opened their shows in Ipswich. So we were the first people to see it. I was the first person to photograph them. And Shared Experience productions were all wildly, wildly exciting and clever. And in this particular production, for example, all 3 of these actresses are playing the same person. They're all playing Maggie Tulliver, the principal character in Mill on the Floss, and they're portraying different elements of her personality. And much of the action in Shared Experience productions went on in darkness, very, very little impenetrable light. But they were the only company to date that I've ever worked for that always gave the photographer 15 minutes at the end of a dress rehearsal to capture some of those impossible moments, like this one that you see on screen at the moment. And indeed, like this one, which is from a production of Jane Eyre, which took place in such little light that it would have been impossible to catch them live. This is another extraordinary shot, and the 2 actresses are both playing Jane, and again, different personalities or different sides of Jane's personality. It was a lovely, lovely company to work with, and I had such a good time during that period because subsequently the shows toured all over the world. In those happy days as a theatre photographer, I got paid sometimes if photographs were used in the local press. And it was lovely to receive tiny checks. They really were tiny checks, but nevertheless, it was lovely to receive tiny checks from the States and from places like Delhi and all over the planet. Absolutely gorgeous times. I couldn't finish this section without talking about this show. I have such happy memories of Little Shop of Horrors. I'm sure you all know the show. It's about an alien plant that basically bays for blood, eats humans, gets bigger and bigger and bigger during the course of the musical. And we were lucky enough to secure the property the moment that the London run of the original production finished. So it came with all of the original Audrey 2 puppets. Audrey 2 is the name of the plant, if you don't know it. And so, of course, they were spectacular, absolutely spectacular. And the biggest of these monsters is a full 8 feet high. And there's a puppeteer inside who was a really, really fit athlete. Now, one of my favorite joys of working at the theatre was touring guests. We were touring guests every single week. Women's institutes, people from local colleges, children sometimes, all sorts of parties. And on one particular day, when I was taking a party of very, very small children around the theatre, the athlete who performed as Audrey 2 happened to be in the building, and he said, "Shall I get inside the plant?" And I said, "Oh, that would be a wonderful idea." So while we were busy touring the theatre, he popped himself inside the plant. And when we got down onto the stage, and I was talking about stage activities, where props are stored and all of that sort of stuff, this guy suddenly reared himself up to his full height of like 8 feet or whatever it was, with a great roar. And I swear, if you'd been listening, you'd have heard the screams from Florida, because I think I did lasting damage to the poor little ones. And I'd probably not get away with it today. I'd probably be locked up. But at the time, it was so, so funny. Great production and great memories. Everything changed. So I talked earlier about being limited to 5 rolls of film and 180 shots, of working in the dark, of focusing in the dark, of trying to sort out the exposure in the dark. And then in 2000, Canon introduced their first professional level digital camera. Absolutely new technology for all of us. I have no doubt that every single theatre photographer in the world ran to their dealership to buy one of these extraordinary new machines. And of course, it changed everything. Previously, the top ISO rating that you could really use was just 400 ISO. At 400 ISO cannot record stuff in the dark. You could uprate that 400 ISO to 800 ISO and then give the film extra development, but it became very grainy, which, you know, wasn't so good. Suddenly, one was presented with a camera that just had almost limitless ISO. I could go right up to 3200 ISO if I chose to. And also, of course, I could see what I was photographing because there was an image on the back of the camera. So the job became so different and so much easier and much, much less of a headache. And my second slideshow stretches from 2000 right through to this year. What's really interesting here is that D30, that's the original digital camera that Canon introduced for professional use, was 3 megapixels. And in amongst all of the images that you're just about to see, there are 3 or 4 images that stretch right back to the year 2000, and that tiny, tiny camera with its tiny little files compared to modern cameras. But I'll bet you can't tell which ones they are. And I'm finding these days with telephones, and you know, Apple is just as bad as all of the other manufacturers. They bang on constantly about the huge number of megapixels that are available in their most recent dazzling phone cameras. And actually, I think this proves beyond any doubt that it actually isn't that important. See what you think. Just going to talk about a couple of these shows because they're so special to me. Trevor Nunn, I'm sure you've all heard of Trevor Nunn, even if you're not theatre goers, but Trevor Nunn might just be the most famous theatre director on the planet. By incredible coincidence, Trevor Nunn was born in Ipswich. I actually went to the same school as him, although I was some years behind him, so I never saw him at school. Anyway, he ran the Royal Shakespeare Company for a large number of years. He ran the National Theatre for a number of years. His name is attached to just about every huge musical that you ever saw touring the world. And he's a Shakespeare scholar, a really, really, really top-end fine Shakespeare scholar. And he'd reached a point, I believe that there are 37 plays in the Shakespeare canon, and he'd reached a point where he directed productions of 36 of them. And he made contact with our theatre and said, look, I've got one left and I'd like to gift it to Ipswich. So I'd like to take over the Wolsey and come and do my 37th and final Shakespeare play in my hometown. So we were, it's just bonkers. So we were gifted the best possible director who came to Ipswich for a couple of months in order to direct an absolutely beautiful production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And I'm pleased to say was absolutely lovely, the easiest person to get on with, and just so refreshing, and such a brilliant, brilliant period in our little theatre's history. I also wanted to talk about this, which is a very English musical called Once, Irish actually, rather than English. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's based on a very, very low budget film, but a very low budget film that went on to win an Oscar because the music is so sensational. And this play, more than any other, has had the most powerful effect on me. It remains the most moving experience that I've ever had in a theatre. Saw it 4 times, absolutely cried my eyes out. And I would urge you, if you ever see a production advertised, just buy a ticket, take Kleenex. It's so beautiful. And as you can see, mostly set in a pub. An absolutely fabulous piece of art with fabulous music. And I had to just bring this matter up. So this is one of the more recent productions at our theatre. It's currently touring the UK. The play is called The Birds and the Bees. It's actually Canadian, but it's been tweaked slightly to set it in the UK. And I was tempted to suggest that we had a competition to see who could guess what was going on in this shot. But then I thought I'd better not, because things could get quite rude. What is actually going on in this shot is that the woman is a farmer and she keeps bees and makes honey. The boy, who is a cyclist, cycles into the place where all of the bees are, and a bee manages to get into his trousers and sting him where it really hurts. And that is as much as you need to know about this play. Very funny, very funny. So let's talk about strategy and how I approach these shows. Knowing your camera and always being ready to use it is the most important thing of all. Early on in my career, after I went freelance in 1988, I think, and in order to make money, I trained as a wedding photographer. I attended any number of seminars by world-class wedding photographers. And one of those wedding photographers was a famous American photographer called Bambi Cantrell. And Bambi was lovely, but she just said something that has resonated with me ever since and still does to this day. And that is that if you have a camera around your neck, it is not a piece of jewelry. If it's hanging on its strap around your neck, it's not working. If you're going to be good at your job, the camera needs to be permanently in front of your face, because that's where it belongs, and that's the only way that you can record moments, because they're also fleeting. And it's something that's stuck with me ever since. And I have to say, sometimes it's very hard work, because if you're, some of the lenses are long, heavy, and after a 2.5 hour show, it's pretty wearing on the arms. However, that is the job, and it's really, really important that the camera is never actually treated as a piece of jewelry and just left to hang around your neck. It's also important to know where all of the dials are, because obviously there's no light in the auditorium. There's light on stage, but out where one is taking images from, there's no light. So you need to be able to, you need to know how to change the ISO in the dark, for example. You need to know how to move from automatic to manual exposure, for example. And all of this stuff has to be done really, really quickly, and generally without even dropping the camera from the face. So it's really, really important to know every single element of the device that you're shooting with. And this is a lovely example. This is the tiniest fleeting moment in this play, and an absolute nightmare for exposure adjustment, because obviously you've got to expose for the highlights, otherwise they'll be burnt out. But there are so few of them because most of this image is so dark, and it just comes with experience. And I'm pleased to say I've had plenty of it now. Learning to anticipate punctuation and moves is also incredibly important. And if you think about it, there are quite a lot of letters in the alphabet, particularly consonants, that screw your mouth up into very awkward shapes. If you imagine saying a word that begins with the letter F, for example, you look like Bugs Bunny, because it pushes your upper lips up and your teeth out. And even more so if you're an actor on stage and you're projecting to the very back of the upper circle or whatever. So it doesn't work just to shoot willy-nilly. You have to wait and catch actors at the right moment. So I'm constantly waiting for punctuation. I'm constantly waiting for full stops and commas and colons and semicolons and breaths. And those are the moments when the mouth is usually relaxed more, and those are the moments that seem to produce the best images. And the same goes with moves. Actors never move without reason. If somebody suddenly gets up out of an armchair and crosses the room, they are doing that for a reason. They're not doing it just because somebody said, I think you should get up and walk across the room. And learning to kind of preempt where they might be going obviously means that as a photographer, I can usually get myself into a position to get a reasonable image. So this is an image from Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie. There's no light on stage. This is an exposure of 1/15 of a second. And I took lots and lots and lots of images of this moment with these two characters sitting on the floor, in the hope that I might just catch one where they're not moving, and thankfully here it is. And I mean, 1/15 of a second is virtually impossible to handhold at the best of times. So this was something of a triumph for me. Avoid surprises. I don't like surprises. I'm not good with surprises. If somebody's handing a gun on stage and it's gonna be fired, I like to know, because I don't want to part company with my camera when there's an enormous bang. So I usually ask for warnings about that kind of thing. And even moments like this, if I know that they're coming, I can set the camera up and know that I'm shooting at a high enough shutter speed to freeze the action of this guy doing a cartwheel, which obviously the whole action's over in less than a second. So it's important to know. And emotion's everything. I hope that you've kind of seen plenty of that in the slideshow that just passed, but I love this shot. There's such rage in this actress's face, which is fantastic. And I love this shot because it just makes me smile. This is a beautiful play called Laurel and Hardy. You may remember the Hollywood film that came out 3 or 4 years ago, and that film is based on this play, and it's absolute beauty of a play. Just 2 actors and constantly funny. Know your space, move around, introduce depth where possible. This stuff applies to us all, doesn't it? Even if you're just doing that, if you're doing landscape photography, if you're doing street photography, you don't want them all to be the same. So in this example, this is shot across the front of the stage at the Wolsey. So I'm standing basically at one of the exit doors, and the other exit doors is immediately in front of me, the other side of the stage. But it pulls the main characters of this production of Cinderella together. So we've got her in the foreground with her glass slipper, and in the background out of focus, we can see the fairy godmother and the prince. This is from the same production, you'd hardly believe it, but completely different, wide angle set, lots and lots of blue light and, you know, strong contrast. And be patient. So this is a production of The Lady Killers, which some of you may know, a very famous British movie, which was adapted for the stage some years ago now. I photographed it twice, and this is the second production, which was at the Wolsey. At the first production, the set has 2 floors. Basically, it's about an old lady who rents a room in her attic, to a group of people that she thinks are musicians when they're actually bank robbers. Through the course of the play, she's constantly going up and down stairs, interrupting their plotting with cups of tea and sandwiches and cakes and visitors and stuff. And the very first time I went to a theatre to photograph this, it was in Colchester, about 20 miles away. I arrived, the elderly actress came out on the stage and just looked at the set for the first time and just said, "I can't climb those stairs." And I waited and I waited and I waited while the production team had to work out a way of making it possible for her to. In the end, they sent me home. I came back the following evening. She still was difficult. Hours passed before they finally got her moving up and down stairs. She was an incredibly famous actress. I'm not going to name names because that's unprofessional, but it was an extremely hair-raising experience, because I think the audience were actually arriving at the theatre before the one dress rehearsal they managed to do was completed. Going to move on to talk about touring theatre. So we have our lovely theatre, the Wolsey, but our town is also blessed with a number of touring companies. These are smaller theatre companies that some of them tour the country, some of them tour the UK, some of them just tour East Anglia, the corner of the country that we live in. And this is a collection of images from those sort of companies. So they tend to be smaller events, smaller sets, fewer actors, but nevertheless, really quite staggeringly beautiful sometimes. have to talk about this space. Thank you so much, United States Air Force. So this extraordinary building is called the Hush House, and it was built for testing jet engines on the site of USAF Bentwaters, which of course is now basically a housing estate. But this building still stands, this huge hangar with the wind tunnel at the end of it. And our most local touring theatre company quite often performs in it. And as you just saw, it provides an absolutely extraordinary venue to take photographs. It's quite stunning, an incredible place to watch live theatre. I'm going to move on to talk about amateur theatre, and I have no idea how much sort of amateur activity there is in American towns and cities, but here in the UK, we all have them. We have them in the tiniest villages. We have them in all the towns. We have them in all the cities. There are so many amateurs working in London. And sometimes it's not very good. Sometimes it's done on minimal budget. And sometimes it really is quite stunning. And I've been fortunate enough to see some amateur theatre that is so good it's impossible to distinguish it between amateur and professional. And just to prove that, I'd like to show you some images next from a collection of amateur productions and young people's productions, most notably in this area. as I said earlier, quite a privilege, actually, quite a privilege to be part of all of this stuff. And as I said, I started in 1984, still love it with a passion, and yeah, don't intend to stop anytime soon. They'll probably make me stop when I'm doddering around on the end of a Zimmer frame. I hope that won't be for a little while yet. Just in case anybody's interested, a quick look inside my camera bag. Even the bag, I went to such lengths to find this bag, which is made by Lowepro, because I needed a bag that would just sit on a theatre seat, just as this one does so perfectly. Because most theatre seats are sprung, obviously you can't put cameras and lenses down on a spring seat, because inevitably the seat will flap up and one of your very expensive lenses will go flying into the next row up the auditorium and break. And this is what's inside. So this is 2 Canon 5D Mark III camera bodies. And the workhorse lenses are both zooms. One is a 2470 f2.8 and the other is a 7200 f2.8. The f2.8 is really important because these are the most light sensitive lenses that are available. However, in very poor light, they're really not up to it. So I also have 2 prime lenses, and those are the 2 circular lenses at the bottom of the screen. And one is a 50mm f1.4 and the other one is a 24mm f1.4. And I always uncap them. I always have them ready for use, just in case there's suddenly a scene that's too dark to record anything using the zoom lenses. So yeah, that's pretty much it. There's a torch visible in the top left-hand corner. Theatres are pretty unforgiving at dress rehearsals. They hardly ever put the lights on in the auditorium. So if I drop something like a lens cap, the torch rescues me when I start poking around on the floor trying to find the thing, which I probably kicked 15 feet across the row. We move on to Act 2 in a very theatrical fashion, just to talk about fellowship of the Royal Photographic Society and the word accidental featuring again, because I really fell into becoming a professional photographer by accident, and I became a fellow in a very similar fashion, and much of it was due to COVID. So what happened was this: COVID struck. All the theatres in this country, I guess all the theatres everywhere, closed down. All of the shows stopped. All of the actors went home and read books. And I had no work. And I was a member of the Royal Photographic Society and had been for years, because they do such a fantastic job. They produce an amazing magazine monthly. And they jumped into action instantly when COVID struck, with a collection of really, really outstanding lectures. They happened on Saturday mornings, and they had photographers from any number of different fields presenting their work. But this man, Alex Nail, who I'd never heard of, produced the impetus that I needed to go for fellowship. And it happened like this. I watched this young lad's presentation and I thought he was phenomenal. He had so much energy and so much passion about his work, which is absolutely beautiful. And when he'd finished his presentation, I wrote to the RPS and I just said, thank you, thank you, thank you. That was the best possible way to spend a Saturday morning in such exhilarating company, and I can't thank you enough, and I can't wait for the next one. And a couple of hours passed and I had an email from them and they said, so thanks for your email, we've been on your website, we'd like you to do one. And at first I declined, because I didn't really know how I could talk about theatre photography for such a long time, because it was so kind of intuitive, and also because I have so little control theatre photography is like street photography. It is genuine reportage. So you hold the camera at your face, you wait for the moment that you think you've got a great image, and you record it. Anyway, after a long discussion, they talked me into doing it, and some weeks later, I presented my work, much of which you've just seen. Sheeta brilliantly was in the audience at that event, and I think it went okay. But when it finished, something happened that absolutely floored me, and that is I didn't know that there were lots of Royal Photographic Society staff in the audience, and they were all saying the same thing, and that is, why haven't you applied for fellowship? And it was something I'd never even thought about, because of the sort of odd style of photography, because it's also sort of in the moment, without much control. I really didn't think a panel of theatre photographs would ever stand a chance of receiving a fellowship. Anyway, it would appear I was wrong, and I'm delighted that a number of people then pushed me to do what happened next. What happened next was that I started opening old hard drives right the way back to when I started my photographic career. And I went through every single show that I've ever photographed. Thankfully, I've always marked the best, what I consider to be the best images. So they're all color-coded and stuff. So I went through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images and pulled out images that I kind of liked. And that resulted in the slideshows that you've just been watching. And then from that, I had to kind of distill it down to just 21 images, which is all that's required for a fellowship panel. So the way that fellowship works is that, first of all, I had an interview with the chairman of the board that's responsible for selecting fellows, adjudicating fellows, if you like. And he was a man called Trevor Yerbury, and he's quite a famous author and artist and portrait photographer based in Scotland. He was absolutely lovely, and I mean I couldn't have spent a couple of hours in the company of anyone more interesting, and as a result of that, I made further changes to the collection of images that I produced. The next thing that I had to do was create a statement of intent. And the way that judging, it's not judging, it's adjudication. They don't use the word judging because they don't kind of tear into work in quite the way that a judge at an amateur photographic competition would do. They're just basically looking for perfection, which is very difficult and ever so intimidating. Anyway, when the adjudication takes place, they are read, the judges, I think there were 4 of them, they are 5 of them, they are read the statement of intent. And the most important part of my statement, of course, is in the first paragraph. Theatre production photography is pure photojournalism, and no matter how dark the lighting conditions, no matter how frenzied the action, the theatre photographer's role is to record a live production rehearsal as it happens, silently, without interruption and without intrusion, and there are no second chances. And I really hope that would get the message across, that this is some seat of your pants stuff sometimes. And the adjudication itself is, again, it's really odd because it takes 2 forms. First of all, they judge the panel, as a collection of 21 images presented as one whole. So they're judging the whole 21 pieces as a single work of art. So the way that the tones change between images becomes really, really important. And I can't tell you how long I spent shifting images around into different patterns, changing images in and out. But this is the collection that I ended up with, and my final little slideshow is just of these 21 images. being judged at the age of 68 was terrifying. Oh God, my heart was racing. I felt sick. I didn't know where to look. It was absolutely horrible. So actually receiving the fellowship was just jaw-dropping. I'm so delighted. I just want to finish off just talking a little bit about post-production, because many people ask about how much cropping takes place, how much post-production takes place, how much retouching takes place. And the answer, in short, is not very much. And I'd like to just share with you half a dozen of the images from the fellowship panel and just show you exactly the process that they go through, because that is pretty much the process that every single one of my images goes through. And just to give you an idea of how picky the FRPS panel are, this was an image that they shared with me when I had my one-to-one with Trevor Yerbury, and he said, "What is that? What is that blue thing?" And I said, "I have no idea. I don't even know what this is a picture of." So he pulled out to the full shot, and it's this. And you know, quite clearly, I was going to get rid of the lantern that's hanging sort of top center, but I hadn't even noticed the little blue blob, which is just above the backside of the out of focus actor in the background. But Trevor said at the time, that sort of stuff is really, really important, because when they're adjudicating an FRPS panel, they will look for anything to complain about, absolutely anything. And it's absolutely essential that just nothing is left to chance. So this is the image straight out of the camera, okay, and opened in Adobe Camera Raw. This is the image after doing a little bit of color correction and a little bit of exposure correction in Camera Raw, and then exporting into Photoshop. And these are the areas that I detected that I felt needed a bit of attention, just to kind of reduce the brightness of the scratches on the floor and on the heel of the actor's shoe, get rid of the offending blue thing, get rid of the lamp. And this is the final image. So there's actually very little, and really the same goes for most of the other images. Trevor really liked this shot, but he didn't like the pale silvery greeny sort of lines that are out of focus in the background, and felt that they were very distracting. There's the corner of a fire in the bottom left-hand corner, which is also very distracting, and he suggested getting rid of them. And it's absolutely essential that no highlights are burnt out. So let me just go through the process again. So this is straight out of camera in Adobe Camera Raw. This is color corrected slightly, but not much else has gone on, taken out of Camera Raw. All of these areas then received some retouching just to sort of tidy them up and clean them up and get rid of the burnt out areas. And this is the image that we ended up with. This one's a right muddle. This is overexposed, but this is straight out of camera and opened in Camera Raw. And you can see all sorts of stuff in the background that clearly needs to go. This is a touring production, so you can see lighting stands. You can see the wall of the building where the set runs out, and quite clearly that all needed fixing. It also looks like somebody's been eating cake in the background on the floor. There's lots and lots of little specks. So darkened off out of Camera Raw, and lots of areas that needed attention because they were distracting. And that's the final image that was submitted. And this has got some really interesting, really odd problems with it. There's what looks like a traffic cone in the background on the left-hand side. It isn't a traffic cone. It's actually the front of an actress's dress. It just happens to be being rather brightly lit, and quite clearly that is a problem. This is how the image came out of the camera in Camera Raw, and I've just made it somewhat colder and a bit more icy in Photoshop. And then these are the areas that required some work. Trevor was really worried that the highlights on both actor and actress on the left side were burnt out, so they needed attention to pull back some detail. Something I'd never ever even noticed was the actress's fingers, which have a circle around them right in the middle of the shot, which just appear over the top of the wood. And I think it was Trevor's wife who was just sort of sitting in on the conversation. She said, "It looks like a pile of pork sausages, so get rid of it." So again, that was an easy enough thing to do in Photoshop, and that's the finished product. This shot, which I love, there's such an atmosphere in this place, but you can see it's somewhat overexposed. It's very cold. So in Adobe Camera Raw, I zoomed in just the tiniest bit. I do hardly any cropping. It's really important to do cropping in camera, because the moment you start cropping files, you're throwing away precious pixels. So inevitably the definition will be reduced and reduced and reduced the more that you crop. So I try not to crop at all, and when I do crop, it's always minimal, because I aim to do absolutely everything I can in camera. So this is the shot out of Camera Raw, having been warmed up to this lovely sort of golden color, and everyone agreed that they felt it was better without all of the rubbish that's being kicked up into the air by the electric fan that's underneath the feet of the actors. So all of them had to go, and that was the result. And this shot is actually taken in a marquee. So the audience is on three sides, and it's a huge, great tent. And unfortunately, you can see light coming in all over the place through the canvas. And another little zoom in slightly just to tighten the shot up a bit and improve it. And then lots and lots of little areas to quite easily remove. And this is really interesting. So something I'd never come across before, which I was taught by a fellow photographer. And he said, in order to locate things that might be viewed as distracting, make a series of prints of the images that you're going to provide and examine them, but examine the prints upside down. And this was the finest example, because I truly couldn't see anything wrong with this image at all. I was delighted with it, and I liked it exactly as it was. And it wasn't until it was held upside down. I'll come to that in just a second. So this is the image out of camera, opened in Camera Raw, and at the moment you can see that the horizon is very slanted, and that would certainly not score great points in this sort of situation. So there it is, straightened up. And when I held a print of this upside down, I discovered that, which I'd never noticed before. And it's a tiny thing, but everybody said it is just the sort of tiny thing that one of those adjudicators will say, "What a pity you didn't notice that, and what a pity you didn't do something about it." So there we are. And finally, this shot, which is a amazing production of a youth theatre show at the Wolsey. So these are all kids. I think all three of the actors, don't know the actress, but I think all three of these actors have gone on to become professionals, which is amazing. But you can see lots of problems with this shot, because the floor is so badly scratched. And here's the shot after a little bit of darkening and stuff in Adobe Camera Raw, and a tiny, tiny bit of cropping. And I then had to just go in and remove all of this damage. And once again, swiftly done. And that is me done. I so hope that you've enjoyed this little presentation, and I look forward to your questions.